I always love the phrase, a storm in a teacup. It exudes drama and leads you to have great expectations of what's to come, only to quickly fizzle out into nothingness. Many who want to instill fear in us depend on such tactics. And for many of those who happen to be Islamophobes, this storm in a teacup is the principle of taqiyya. If you aren't aware of this term, don't be ashamed. Most Muslims haven't either. And even if they have during their Islamic educational formative years, such a reference doesn't amount to much. It fizzles out into nothingness. Taqiyya is a ruling that is based on both minor Quranic and Sunnah interpretations, when a believer is licensed or allowed to conceal their faith under threat of persecution or mortal danger. Such license includes the condition that such a believer within their heart of hearts is still true to his faith and belief system. Now, in the many videos I've generated concerning topics revolving around Islam, a common thread amongst the haters of those videos is the mudslinging that follows identifying taqiyya as an example of the overall wickedness and clear hypocrisy of the Muslim faith. I think it's time to set the record straight. Anti-Muslim propaganda comes in many shapes and colors. With taqiyya, Western polemicists and conspiracy theorists alike suggest it as a universal and major Muslim doctrine. Proof that every Muslim, from your neighbor to a foreign political leader, has divine permission to lie in order not to only advance themselves, but also Islam. It's painted as a hidden weapon, a system of deception that at the very least makes Muslims impossible to trust. The narrative goes like this. Muslims can smile, integrate, even speak of peace and tolerance, but all of it, they say, is camouflage. The claim is that only when Islam dominates will the mask come off, and the real intentions be revealed. In this distorted view, taqiyya becomes a long-term strategy to lull the world into submission. One of the most damaging misrepresentations of taqiyya in Western discourse is the claim that it amounts to theological hypocrisy. Critics argue that Islam gives its followers a divine loophole, pretend to be peaceful, tolerant, or even friendly, while secretly holding opposite intentions. In this framing, Muslims are accused of practicing religious doublespeak, where outward moderation is simply a mask for hiding extremism. Take, for example, the way polemicists like Robert Spencer in The Truth About Muhammad argue that Muslims cannot be taken at face value, since their religion supposedly allows dishonesty in all dealings with non-Muslims. Likewise, Raymond Ibrahim has written in the Al-Qaeda Reader that taqiyya is a tool of jihad, enabling Muslims to deceive the West until they're strong enough to impose dominance. These sources circulate widely online, shaping popular fears that any Muslim sincerity is questionable. By branding taqiyya as institutionalized hypocrisy, Islamophobes erode trust and cast suspicion on everyday Muslims. It transforms ordinary acts of coexistence, working, voting, or even befriending others into supposed acts of subterfuge. In reality, it's not theology, but propaganda, weaponizing mistrust to fuel Islamophobia. I really do appreciate you taking the time and watching the Kandari Chronicles. Please do join our community by subscribing so that you don't miss out on any content regarding the Arab and Muslim history, identity, and modern condition. And if you really do enjoy the channel week in and week out and would like to support us even further, please do join us at our YouTube membership program as well as on Patreon. Thanks again. One of the most common tools Islamophobes use to stir suspicion is the Prophet Muhammad's statement, "War is deceit." Said in the context of battlefield strategy, this hadith referred to military tactics such as feints, ambushes, or surprise. Practices found in every civilization's art of war. But taken out of context, it becomes fuel for the claim that Islam itself is a religion of deception. Writers such as Andrew Boston in The Legacy of Jihad and Daniel Pipes in multiple policy essays argue that this saying shows Muslims are permitted to lie at all times, not only during warfare. For Boston, it unmasks Islam's disingenuousness in dealing with the West, while Pipes has suggested that Muslims in democratic societies may simply be engaging in a civilizational deception until they're strong enough to dominate. Both conflate taqiyya, a narrow doctrine of survival under persecution, with a universal command to mislead non-Muslims. The distortion is clear. A wartime maxim is inflated into a theological principle of dishonesty. Yet, truth-telling is a core Islamic ethic. The Quran warns against hypocrisy, nifaq, and another hadith declares, truthfulness leads to righteousness, and righteousness leads to paradise. By projecting one battlefield phrase as the essence of Muslim life, Islamophobic authors create the illusion that no Muslim can ever be trusted. In reality, what they're doing is not scholarship. It's a weaponization of mistrust designed to breed fear and doubt. To understand taqiyya, we need to go back to the earliest days of Islam. In Mecca before the Hijrah, Muslims were a persecuted minority. The Quran itself gives permission for concealment when life is at risk. One early companion, Ammar ibn Yasir, was tortured until he verbally renounced Islam, though his heart remained faithful. This moment is often called as the first practical use of taqiyya, concealing faith under duress. The concept later became central in Shi'i thought, as Shi'a communities were repeatedly persecuted under Sunni empires. Leaders like Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq explicitly taught the use of taqiyya for survival, describing it as a shield for the believer. For centuries, Shi'a populations in places like Abbasid Baghdad or Ottoman lands relied on concealment to avoid imprisonment or execution. Even Sufi Muslims, often targeted by more rigid authorities, practiced forms of taqiyya. Figures such as Al-Hallaj, whose mystical utterances provoked charges of heresy. But as conditions changed and religious tolerance expanded into modern times, the social need for taqiyya faded. Today, for almost all practical purposes, it has disappeared, more a historical memory than a living practice. Taqiyya was historically a survival tool, used by Muslims under persecution, not a universal license to lie. Despite this, Islamophobes have inflated taqiyya into a global conspiracy. They claim it proves Muslims have evil agendas, that they're the enemy, thus turning ordinary acts of coexistence into supposed deception. In reality, this is an obscure, rare doctrine magnified into a weapon against Islam. As I said at the very beginning, a storm in a teacup. By taking something out of context, critics have created fear where none is warranted. Islam's core teachings emphasize truthfulness and integrity. The obsession with taqiyya reveals more about the anxieties of Islamophobes than about Muslims themselves, making something out of nothing simply to justify or amplify suspicion. At the end of the day, Muslims are no different from anyone else. They want to raise their families, build communities, and live meaningful lives. And when faced with danger, they'll do what every other human being would do, seek survival. In rare, extreme cases, that might even mean hiding their beliefs or telling an untruth to stay alive. But this instinct is not uniquely Muslim. It's shared by Christians who concealed faith under Roman persecution, Jews who survived the Inquisition by outward conformity, and countless others throughout history. Survival is a universal human drive, not a theological conspiracy. To single out Muslims for a practice rooted in exceptional circumstances is to ignore the shared history of humanity. When stripped of distortion, taqiyya simply reminds us that, regardless of faith, people everywhere will cling to life. And that is nothing to fear.